My husband is about to be served with a lawsuit from my mother, and he still thinks the $60,000 she gave us was a gift. That's the truth, but it's not the whole story. The whole story is that I'm the one who lit the fuse on this bomb 18 months ago, and I've spent every day since praying it wouldn't go off. Now, the clock has run out, and all I can do is wait for the blast. It started, as these things often do, with money, or rather, the spectacular lack of it. My husband James and I had been married for 6 years. The first few were the kind you see in advertisements for insurance companies, laughing in a half painted living room, planning trips we'd take someday, building a life that felt sturdy and real. But that life was built on two steady incomes. The foundation cracked the day James came home from his secure, well compensated job in supply chain management and announced he was quitting. He was done making someone else rich. He was going to chase his own dream, a tech startup. His startup was based out of our second bedroom. His grand vision was to create a revolutionary app that would, in his words, disrupt the entire digital media landscape. In practice, this meant he spent his days hunched over a glowing screen, tinkering with code for a project so vaguely defined it changed from one week to the next. He wasn't building a business. He was LARPing as a tech mogul, and I was footing the bill for his fantasy camp. While he was busy innovating, my life became a marathon of pure survival. I was the one making the 90-minute commute into downtown Chicago every morning, navigating a high pressure marketing job, and then coming home to a mountain of bills. His dream was fueled by my salary, and my salary was no longer enough. Our savings, which we'd painstakingly built, vanished in what felt like a weekend. Then came the credit cards, their balances climbing so high they seemed to mock me from the monthly statements. Soon we were 2 months behind on our mortgage. The letters from the bank started arriving, first polite reminders, then notices filled with words like delinquency and foreclosure. The stress was a physical weight. I'd lie awake at 3 in the morning, listening to the house settle, feeling the walls closing in, my heart hammering against my ribs. That's when my mother intervened. My mom is a retired schoolteacher who built her nest egg through decades of disciplined saving and smart, cautious investing. She raised me on her own, and she treats her budget like a sacred text. Watching me, her only child, unravel was more than she could bear. After weeks of my increasingly frantic phone calls, she sat me down in her tidy kitchen, a place that had always been my sanctuary. She offered us $60,000, but her expression was deadly serious. "This isn't a gift, honey," she said, her gaze firm. "This is a loan. I love you, but this is my retirement. This is my security. I need it back as soon as you and James are on your feet." I agreed so fast the words tumbled out of my mouth. I was desperate. She had me write it down on a page from a yellow legal pad, right there at her table. It was a simple, clear statement. The date, the amount, and my signature under a sentence acknowledging it was a loan to be repaid. It wasn't a formal contract drawn up by a lawyer, but it was a promise, a tangible record of the truth. The thing is, I never told James. I just couldn't. He was already so brittle, so defensive about his lack of success. His pride was a fragile, paper thin shield he held up against the world. Telling him that my mother's generosity came with terms and conditions felt like it would shatter him completely. In his mind, this was a selfless act from his kind mother in law, a no strings attached rescue, and I, in an act of profound cowardice, let him believe it. I constructed an entire architecture of excuses in my head. It was just a temporary secret. We'd pay her back as soon as his app took off, so what did the label matter? Once he landed that first big investor, we'd write her a check, and this little omission would become a funny story we told years later. I told myself I was protecting him from more stress. I was managing his fragile emotional state, but the ugly truth is that I was protecting myself. I was avoiding the fight I knew would come, the accusations, the inevitable explosion of his wounded pride. I was choosing silence over conflict. But his big break never came. Instead, things got worse, exponentially worse. The $60,000, which was meant to be a lifeline to catch up on our mortgage and pay down our debt, became his personal venture capital fund. He treated it like he'd won the lottery. First, there was the new command center for his office, a custom built computer with three massive curved monitors that set us back thousands. Then he enrolled in a series of overpriced online masterclasses led by tech gurus who promised to unlock the secrets of Silicon Valley. Then Then came the final, infuriating straw. He took $5,000 and dumped it into some dog themed cryptocurrency that his buddies on a Reddit forum swore was about to go to the moon. It crashed a week later, and our $5,000 evaporated into thin air. I begged him to be more careful. I pleaded with him to consider getting a part time job, anything to create a trickle of steady income. I suggested he could work at Lowe's or even drive for Uber on the weekends. Each suggestion was met with a torrent of accusations. I didn't support his vision. I was a pessimist. I was the anchor holding him back from his destiny. He skillfully painted me as the villain of his story, the cold, practical wife who just didn't believe in him. The emotional gulf between us widened into a canyon. I think the last flicker of my love for him died about 8 months after the loan. A year after my mother wrote that check, I was sleeping in the guest room. I'd lie there at night fantasizing not about a lavish life, but about a small, clean apartment where the only finances I had to worry about were my own. The final betrayal wasn't even about money. I found out he was having an emotional affair. He had met a woman in one of his online coding groups, and their messages were a tapestry of shared secrets and private jokes. He complained to her about me, his unsupportive wife, and she offered him the validation he so desperately craved. It was a deep, intimate betrayal that severed the last frayed cord connecting us. When I confronted him, he didn't even bother to deny it. He just stared at his screen and gave a little shrug as if I were pointing out a typo in his code. That night, I told him I wanted a divorce. We've been separated for 3 months, and until recently, the process was slow but civil. We hired a mediator. He seemed to agree, passively, to a 50-50 split of what little we had left. He's been operating under the assumption that our only debts are the credit cards and the mortgage. He thinks we're both walking away with a clean if empty slate. He has no idea about the $60,000 storm cloud gathering directly over his head. My mother's patience, meanwhile, has completely evaporated. She watched him burn through her life savings. Now that a divorce is happening, she's done being quiet. She called me last week, her voice stripped of all warmth. It was cold, hard, and final. She wants her money back. And she informed me that if James refuses to acknowledge the loan as a marital debt, she has already retained an attorney and is prepared to sue him for it. She still has the letter I wrote. She's not bluffing. The problem, the catastrophic life altering problem, is that James still believes it was a gift. And my silence, the silence I chose to protect him, to protect myself, has now become a trap. I keep telling myself I'm sparing him the shock, but the truth is, I'm just terrified of his rage. I'm hiding from the consequences of my own lie. He's already called me manipulative in our arguments. When this comes out, it will become his entire gospel. He will paint me as a liar who conspired with her mother to financially ruin him from the start. A sick part of me is consumed with guilt, but another colder part of me remembers the nights I cried myself to sleep over foreclosure notices while he was shopping for a new ergonomic chair. I remember him calling me a dream killer for suggesting he get a job. I remember how he checked out of our marriage long before I did, yet still feels entitled to half of everything, including the equity in our home that I alone paid for. Maybe he deserves this. Maybe this is just karma, finally catching up. Now my mother has given me an ultimatum. I have 1 week to tell James myself and have our lawyers incorporate the debt into the settlement. If I don't, she files the lawsuit. I can already hear the gossip. Did you hear about them? Her own mother is suing him over a secret loan he knew nothing about. It's a disaster of my own making, and the countdown has begun. I don't know which path leads to less damage, confessing and trying to contain the fire or waiting for the inevitable public explosion. All I know is that I have 7 days to decide before my whole world goes up in flames. Well, it's over. The bomb I was sitting on for a year and a half finally went off, and I didn't get to disarm it. I didn't even get to run. I just closed my eyes and waited for the impact. The fallout has been more chaotic and destructive than my worst nightmares could have possibly conjured. James knows. He knows everything. And the life I was trying to carefully take apart is now being ripped to shreds. I made the decision with only 2 days left on my mother's ultimatum. Her morning text had become a single sharp word. Well, She didn't want to be the bad guy, but she wasn't going to sacrifice her own financial security for a man who had treated her generosity like a disposable windfall. The thought of him being served legal papers at our old house, completely blindsided by a man in a cheap suit, felt like a level of cruelty I couldn't stomach. As much as I resented him, a small, stubborn part of me still remembered the man I married. I had to be the one to tell him. I asked him to meet me at a small cafe near the lakefront, a place so neutral it was practically invisible. I thought the public setting might keep him calm. I thought wrong. I started gently, my voice trembling so badly I had to grip my coffee cup with both hands to keep it from rattling. I told him there was a significant piece of information he needed to know before we finalized the divorce. Then I explained that the $60,000 from my mother had always been a loan. I slid a photocopy of the note I'd written across the table. It felt less like evidence and more like a written confession to a crime. His face was a mask of confusion for a few seconds as he read it. Then I watched the transformation happen in real time. The confusion curdled into disbelief, and the disbelief hardened into pure, unadulterated rage. His eyes narrowed, and a muscle in his jaw started twitching violently. He let out a short, brutal laugh that sounded like breaking glass. Heads at nearby tables turned. "Let me get this straight," he said, his voice low and menacing at first, then rising with every word. He stood up, leaning over the small table, his shadow falling over me. "You're telling me that for the last 18 months, you and your mother have been running a con? You let me believe we were safe while you were holding this secret debt over my head?" I tried to get him to sit down, my words a useless whisper against his fury. I told him we could figure it out, that it didn't have to be this way, but he was gone. He was on a different planet, a planet made of betrayal and indignation. He launched into a full-blown tirade. He accused me of conspiracy and financial fraud. He claimed the note was a forgery I had just created to screw him in the divorce. He punctuated his rant by slamming his hand on the table, making the cups jump. Then, his voice booming through the now silent cafe, he declared that this was my debt and my mother's debt, and that he would never pay one single penny. That moment was a turning point. Our divorce went from being a sad, quiet affair to all out war. Everything we had previously agreed on, the small amount of equity in the house, the car, even who got the good knives, was suddenly thrown out the window. His lawyer sent mine a revised settlement proposal that was nothing short of a declaration of war. It argued that because of my fraudulent concealment of a material fact, James was now entitled to a majority of our assets to compensate for the profound emotional and financial distress I had caused him. It gets worse. He's on a scorched earth campaign to destroy my reputation. He's been calling our old mutual friends, feeding them a carefully crafted story where I am a master manipulator who conspired with her wealthy mother to trap him in a web of debt. He even found some of my professional contacts on LinkedIn and sent them vague, ominous messages about my lack of integrity. The narrative he's spinning is so twisted, so far from the desperate, terrified choice I made that I barely recognize myself in it. I'm no longer his ex-wife. I'm a monster who planned his downfall. My mother, for her part, is incandescent with rage. But now her anger is split between him and me. She's furious that I waited, that my cowardice gave him the opening to create this victim narrative. She's still determined to get her money, but her lawsuit is now hopelessly tangled up in our divorce proceedings. Our respective lawyers are trying to work together, but it's like trying to untangle two fishing lines in the dark. There's no easy way forward. I feel like I'm suffocating. Every choice I made, every decision born out of a misguided attempt to avoid a fight, has only made the final explosion bigger. I thought my silence was a shield, but it was just a leaky container for poison. It didn't stop the poison from existing, it just allowed it to concentrate until it became lethal. Every day is a new form of torment. A new aggressive email from his lawyer, a new demand for financial documents from a year ago, a new insulting text from James, which my lawyer advises me to ignore. The mediator officially withdrew from our case, citing an environment too hostile and adversarial to continue. My mother's lawsuit is now in a legal gray area, waiting for a judge to decide if a handwritten IOU from a wife constitutes a marital liability when the husband was kept in the dark, and James is digging in, energized by his own righteous anger, determined to make me pay for everything. I wish I could say that the worst is over, that the truth coming out was the climax. But as I sit here, drowning in legal fees and character assassination, I have the sickening realization that the confession wasn't the end of the story. It was just the end of the beginning.